Stop what you're doing. Seriously, if you own or are even just thinking about looking at clinical stage biotech stocks, you absolutely need to see this breakdown of Tango Therapeutics. Last week, I sat down and ran their Q1 2026 financials and clinical updates through 5 distinct valuation models. I even threw in Warren Buffett's and Peter Lynch's legendary investing checklist for good measure. And guys, what I found literally shocked me. By the end of this explainer, you are going to know exactly whether this stock setup is a brilliant Buffett deep value buy or if it's just a classic Lynch trap waiting to happen.
Okay, let's dive right in with a pretty shocking reality check. Tango generated zero, yes, absolutely zero, product and collaboration revenue for the quarter. Not a single dollar came through the door. Now, I know the common fear here. For most retail investors, seeing a massive zero on the top line is a terrifying red flag, right? It usually sends people running for the hills. But what if I told you that in the deep tech, biotech sector, a zero revenue quarter isn't always what it seems? It's kind of like judging a book before it's even been written. That zero is just the tip of the iceberg, and it often hides the real, explosive value underneath.
And to make matters worse, this lack of revenue is paired with a seriously widening net loss of $45.5 million just for this quarter. Look, I totally get it. It is a painful reality holding a stock while watching the cash burn pile up quarter after quarter. It's incredibly stressful, especially when you realize they lost about $39.9 million in the exact same quarter last year. So the cash fire isn't just burning, it's actively accelerating.
But wait, hold on a second, because here is the crucial data point that completely flips all of those valuation models upside down. A staggering $380 million cash stock file. This single metric completely changes the entire conversation. Tango isn't just burning cash blindly. They are sitting on an absolute war chest. It's literally like having an oxygen tank while deep sea diving. It drastically alters their survival timeline and buys them the critical, necessary time to actually let their science prove itself.
So here's our clear, actionable framework for today's explainer. We're going to unpack this zero revenue financial paradox, take a closer look at that $380 million lifeline, examine their critical 2026 pipeline catalysts, review a sudden boardroom shuffle, and finally break down exactly why the market is so incredibly divided on TNGX right now.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Zero Revenue, Widening Losses. We really need to see how these mounting clinical costs are actually building the foundation of their future business.
When you look at the year-over-year shift, it's pretty profound. Collaboration revenue just vanished entirely, dropping from $5.4 million down to zero. Why? Well, their previous agreement with Gilead ended. Meanwhile, R&D dropped slightly to $33.5 million because they actually discontinued their TNG98 program. But on the flip side, general and administrative costs spiked from $11.5 up to $15.2 million. That was largely driven by personnel costs, and that is what pushed the total net loss up to that $45.5 million mark.
So how on earth does a company survive burning over $45 million every single quarter? Let's move on to Section 2, the $380 million lifeline.
Well, the answer is sitting right there in their Q1 filings. That $379.8 million war chest we talked about, it officially guarantees their operations all the way into 2028. For anyone out there stressing about immediate dilution or the company going bankrupt, this completely mitigates those short-term survival fears. Basically, they have the fuel in the tank to get through their upcoming clinical trials without having to go out and beg the market for more cash tomorrow.
Okay, so with the financial runway secured into 2028, let's explore exactly what kind of life-saving science Tango is actually spending all this money on. In Section 3, Pipeline and 2026 Catalysts.
Before we look at their specific calendar, we really need to understand a core concept when it comes to biotech investing. Tango's entire valuation hinges on what the industry calls binary events. Think of these as do-or-die clinical readouts, like Phase 1 or 2 safety and efficacy data. The smart money out there is watching these extremely closely. Why? Because they act as massive catalysts that can swing a stock 50% or more in either direction, all based on whether the science actually works in human patients.
Now, this timeline is basically your cheat sheet for 2026, and it reveals a really dense calendar of these binary events. Tango is targeting very specific genetic alterations that drive cancer, specifically MTAP-deleted cancers. These are tumors missing a specific gene, which actually makes them highly vulnerable to Tango's targeted drugs. It's fascinating stuff. This year alone, we are expecting initial Phase 1 and 2 safety and efficacy data for their lead inhibitor, vopimetostat, in a combination trial. We're also expecting a lung cancer data update and initial data for their brain-penetrating inhibitor, TNG456. Plus, they're kicking off a brand new combination study with Erasca in the second half of the year. So yeah, a lot is happening.
But to pull off these massive, incredibly complex clinical trials, you need the right generals in the war room. That brings us to Section 4, Boardroom Shuffle. This recent corporate restructuring really paints a picture of a company in transition. We saw 2 directors step down, and to be clear, the filings explicitly stated there were no operational disagreements. They essentially made way for a whole slate of new executives. Sung Lee was appointed as the new lead independent director, and they brought on a brand new CFO, Matthew Gall, along with new strategy and operations heads. Now, this isn't just them shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. It strongly signals a hard, very deliberate pivot toward late-stage clinical execution and regulatory readiness.
So, with the financials laid bare, the intense science outlined, and the leadership newly established, how exactly is the broader market digesting this high-stakes oncology gamble? Let's wrap things up with Section 5, the market's divided verdict.
The tension surrounding this stock really boils down to a classic biotech tug-of-war. The bulls look at Tango and they see that Peter Lynch-style, multi-billion-dollar optionality. They see a flawless balance sheet with a runway all the way to 2028 and a massive slate of clinical catalysts that could literally redefine cancer treatment. But the bears look at the exact same company and all they see is zero current revenue, those widening $45 million quarterly losses, and the completely terrifying risk of future dilution if any of these highly complex 2026 trials happen to stumble.
So, the ultimate question you have to ask yourself after running all the models is this. Is Tango's $380 million lifeline going to be enough to push their precision oncology treatments across the finish line? Or is this just another incredibly expensive science experiment that's going to burn out long before it ever reaches the market? You are going to want to keep a very close eye on those 2026 clinical readouts because they hold the absolute answer. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer and keep learning.